I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Danny Strong, creator of Dopesick, who was nominated for a DGA award for the series finale of that series called The People versus Purdue Farmer. Danny, you have years of credits as an actor, producer, writer, and this is your fourth time, I think, as a director. What is the most unexpected or challenging part of being in the director's chair while also serving as the creator, co-writer, showrunner of the series?
Yeah, it's complicated doing them at once, primarily because on this show, we had to block shoot a lot of it. So there was a period of almost 2 months where I was supervising two other directors while I was the third director. And it got to be very, very complicated because I'm acting as the showrunner and I was basically the de facto producing director of the show. So I've got to supervise other directors and then direct myself at the same time. So there were times where I really got screwed out of prep. And I would sometimes show up on locations that I hadn't been to and had to shoot, which I didn't realize that it was going to turn out like that until then. There's things that sometimes you don't realize are going to happen, and then all of a sudden I'm in the situation, and I'm like, oh my God, I haven't been to this set. But I had an incredible team and an incredible cinematographer with Checo Varese. So we were able to make it work. But yeah, that was, I think, the most difficult part was doing the producing director job and then being a director simultaneously. While having to supervise other directors, sometimes, on the same day, where we would, in the morning, one director would shoot, afternoon, another director, and then I would step in and finish the day with one scene. It was a very complex situation.
Absolutely, to navigate that every day, as well as trying to put your best foot forward in terms of as being an artist. So the morning of the DGA TV nominees announcement, what was your reaction when you found out you were nominated amongst this really amazing group of people?
I was so blown away that I actually screamed. Like I screamed like I was 14 years old, like at a Hanson concert. Does anyone even know who Hanson is anymore? Anyway,
Oh, yeah.
I was like so happy and completely shocked. I was really hoping Barry Levinson would get nominated. I thought if we had a shot at a nomination, it would be Barry. And then I saw Barry was nominated and I was like, oh, we did it. And then my name was, a few after. And I was just blown away. And these directors, they're incredible. These shows are incredible this year. So it's a thrilling group of people that my name is with. So I'm humbled and just like kind of floored by the whole thing, to be honest with you.
I can imagine. And, when I look back at what you're most known for, as a creator, you tend to gravitate towards social or political subjects that are kind of transformative and things that have really kind of impacted American life, particularly now Dopesick. I'm just wondering, what does it say about you as an artist that you are attracted to that kind of subject matter?
Well, I don't know what it says about me. I will say that, in my 20s, I was a pounding the pavement actor, right? Where just any job I could get, I would, take any audition I could get. I'd be thrilled to have the audition. And simultaneously during that period was the buildup to the Iraq War, and the Iraq War itself. And I was so enraged by it. I remember just being so enraged by so many parts of American politics, while at the same time, I'm like auditioning for like my Golden Grams commercial and, like autoweb.com, like, please, I hope I get the autoweb.com audition or job. And then so when I started writing and I started to focus on social issues, it was something where it was just a way to exercise my anger and my frustration at events in the world. I never thought anything would get made or that I would actually say something that millions of people would watch. That literally never crossed my mind, and that it would ever happen. Like I never believed something like that would happen. It just was a really healthy outlet for how I was feeling about what was going on. And then lo and behold, the first thing that I get made is this movie called Recount, about the Florida recount. And the film wasn't just about the Florida recount. It was about the 6 years after the Florida recount. That's when I wrote it. I wrote it in 2006. So I was talking about that entire, the recount for me was a metaphor for the next 6 years of American politics and what happened. And I think very, very much it's only just gotten worse, what I was trying to talk about in that piece. And it was really gratifying to do that. And it was really fulfilling. And so I haven't exclusively done those types of pieces, but I do try to come back to them as frequently as possible. And when I did Dopesick, I was specifically looking to do something like that when John Goldwyn, the producer, came to me with the idea about doing a piece on the opioid crisis. So I thought, I even said to him, I said, well, that's exactly the kind of thing I'm looking to do right now.
Yeah. I mean, I thought I knew what the opioid crisis was all about. I thought I had it kind of down pat in my mind, but I really had no idea, to be honest, how insidious and how far-reaching, this awful legacy that the Sackler family had left everybody. I didn't understand what Dopesick even meant until it was explained on the series. I just wonder, given that you say you're so interested in current events and you're angry about things that are happening in society, what did you learn about the opioid crisis from actually being involved in bringing this thing to life?
Everything. I mean, it wasn't something I was that familiar with at all. There was a big article in 2017 in the New Yorker written by Patrick Radden Keefe that kind of blew the whole Sackler family story up. And I had read the article and I was blown away by the story as so many people in the country were. This article was a huge turning point for the Sackler family because they had been written about over the years, but it had never really taken fire. But there was something about what this journalist had done and the way he had, laid the case for their actions and the consequences of their actions that it really caught hold. And then Nan Goldin, the artist, started doing these really audacious protests in museums all over the world and really blew them up into the national villains that they so deservedly have become. But like you, I knew there was an opioid crisis, and I knew OxyContin was supposedly bad, but I didn't really know that many details about it until I dove into it as something to potentially write about.
So this show takes on such a harrowing journey. I thought we were going to see some pretty confronting stuff. I didn't really realize how confronting it would be. These corporate drug lords have wrought such devastation across America. What I found most compelling and what could have really turned really bad in this series is the way that you tell this story in a very non-linear, non-chronological way, and you toggle between the personal and the personal stories, and then the agents and lawyers going after Purdue at a more macro level. I found that so compelling, and that could have really not been compelling if it was not done properly. I'm wondering why you decided to tell the story in this way.
Well, to me, I was looking for a more bird's eye view, a more story that told more of the totality of the event than actually one specific story, because I think it's far too complex a subject matter to tell in one specific story. I think if I were to have just focused on, say, Michael Keaton's character, and that would have been the whole show, I think it could have been quite powerful, and he's unbelievable in the show, right? But I don't think that would have told the full story of the opioid crisis in the way I wanted to tell it. And my sort of hook into it as a piece of drama was when I read that there were investigations by a U.S. attorney and his prosecutors and a DEA agent. I thought, oh, okay, well, there's investigations. So then I could have some type of a thriller engine. And then I thought, well, I've got to have the victims. And if I'm doing the victims, I got to be inside Purdue Pharma with the criminals and show the crimes being committed. And I thought, well, that could actually be a really dynamic way to tell the story, because it could have a multi-dimensional tone to it. The investigators has sort of more of a thriller tone. The story of the coal town and the victims has a very tragic addiction story, which I thought could be very powerful, that would contradict nicely to the investigation story. And then the story with the Sacklers had its own sort of demented, warped crimes, at times almost a black comedy, slightly weird tone to it. And I thought, well, you mix these all together, and if it works, and if it could feel like one piece, which was one of the big challenges, was making sure that it all felt like one piece. Visually, we did slightly different visual styles with each, with the color palette, nothing too overly dramatic. But putting that all together, I thought, well, that could be a really dynamic way dramatically as entertainment value, but also, as thematically, to just tell the story on all these different levels, from victims on the ground in a small coal town to the halls of the Justice Department, to Congress, right, to the halls of the DEA. And then the last element of this was the time period jumping, which was not really an artistic choice. It was actually a huge pain in my ass, but I was stuck with it because these investigations happened in different time periods. And I really wanted to show the crimes. So I thought, okay, well then we'll just have to jump around in time periods. And that was, from a writing point of view, very, very complicated in post. I was constantly reordering scenes because it would just be confusing to jump too quickly within different time periods, or clunky. So that was something that I was almost working against, but I thought, if I could get that to work for me, it could add to the drama, add another level of sort of dramatic tension and excitement, to have a scene in 1996, and then you cut to 2003, and the investigators are talking about that scene we just saw. So it was something that I was hopeful I could make work in a dynamic way.
And thankfully it did. Danny, thanks so much for your time today. We're going to bring you back for our group chat shortly.
Great, I can't wait. Thanks.
I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Oscar winner Barry Levinson, who is nominated for a DGA award for the premiere episode of Dopesick entitled First Bottle. Barry, you are one of a number of directors collectively bringing this show to life. Your contribution to the overall look and feel of the show is significant, though, because you're bringing the first episode to life with the pilot, which establishes the look and feel. Talk us through the specific challenges of taking the reins on a first episode of a series like this.
Well, you are laying the groundwork, for all of it. And so the question becomes style. What is the style that we're going to be, working with? We're going to be moving in and out of time. How do we want to handle that? Because we're jumping, back X number of years forward, so years, and all of those things. And so how do we balance it so it doesn't become some kind of abrupt things, and we're losing the continuity of the piece. So you have to begin to say, how do we do this so that yes, okay, now we're going back and we found out this is what the investigation was doing, and X number of years before that, this is where the townspeople and what was going on. So it is, in a sense, you're trying to lay it out in a way that in subsequent, I did the first two, but in the subsequent episodes, it'll all continue to fit together. And so you have to kind of think down the road, how do we do this? How do we handle that? What the dynamics that we're going to bring to this? And then, of course, you have you're going to have an arc of characters and the behavior and all of that. In other words, so we're seeing in the first episode, for instance, if we're talking about Michael Keaton's character, this is where he is here, but there's going to be this whole arc to that performance. So where do we want to start with him? And so it's all of that kind of a little bit of this, a little bit of that, how do we want to lay in this music that's going to fit? And then they can ultimately make decisions, later. There seems to be a continuity to it all. So it all seems of one big piece.
Absolutely. And then I think back to the way the series first opens in 1986 with a raspy voiced Richard Sackler, played beautifully by Michael Stillbarger, maybe not beautifully, but terrifyingly, who says the time has come to redefine the nature of pain. If you don't know who the Sacklers are, you think, oh, that sounds so altruistic and that sounds great. Of course, it goes completely awry. And I just wonder what you most valued about opening the series in this way, quietly, without too many fireworks, setting the scene for a corporate drug lord to begin corroding at the fabric of American society.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. When I read that, and I thought it was, Danny wrote that speech, and I thought we need to find a way where we're not, it's almost a statement, for the show in a way, that this is the plan. So I felt that you didn't want to start cutting it up right away. We'll cut to this, and here's in the room. Is like, just stay on him, and then just slowly keep pulling back. Where the hell is he? Who is he talking to? And let that settle in. So you wanted to find a way to create a sense of drama, but not melodrama. So it's a very subtle kind of moving back and back until you realize there are people in the room, et cetera. And then you're doing it. So it was a statement in a way that this is where this is going to go, and find the most simplistic possible way to do that. Not try to be fancy, not try to infuse it with things. Just let's sit. This is the Sackler character who ultimately comes up with this idea, and let's take our time, and let's hope that if we build it correctly, it's the step by step by step.
Yeah, it was so amazing that it worked for me because I was immediately invested. Stuhlbarg does such a great job I felt like I was watching Darth Vader. He's just so menacing, and he's so quiet and quietly spoken. He talked about the epidemic of suffering. And then, of course, we find out that the epidemic they create is so much worse than the epidemic of suffering. I wonder what your personal reaction to this story was when you first became involved, because as I was mentioning to Danny, your colleague on this series, I learned a hell of a lot about the opioid crisis that I just really had no idea. What about you?
Well, I thought I knew, but I didn't when I started to read what Danny, was working on. So then there was the insides of it that I did not know. I didn't know that this is what took place at Purdue. I didn't know that these intentional steps were taking place. I didn't know about the cause and effect to the degree that the series ultimately laid out. And so for me, there was that learning curve. And once I thought, sometimes you think you know something, and then you go, no, you don't really know. You only know the baby steps of what took place. How the government allowed certain things to take place. I didn't know about that. Somehow I'm naive that think that we're going to be protected, and when in fact they allowed them to put on the label less than 1%, addictive, etc. I was shocked when I said, really, a government agency did this? How did that happen? Of course, the piece plays out and explains it. So I have to say that on face value that I was naive to the machinations that in fact took place.
Yeah, and I know what OxyContin is all about. I know about the suffering. What I didn't understand was how the system feels so rigged to enable the corporate America and the almighty dollar above all else. And it then brings me to this. So on the one hand, you're telling a story on television to entertain us, but you're also bringing important subject matter to life. Is it difficult to balance the desire to entertain and engage while also staying true to the facts as much as possible?
Yes, yeah. It's a good question. It's an obligation in my mind that you have to find a way to entertain without it seemingly being entertaining, if you know what I mean. In other words, you don't want to suddenly feel like, look, I'm really kind of a little playing some games here and tricks. You want to somehow lay it out with a certain credibility to characters, not villains and heroes. These were people. This is what went on. This is the cause and effect. And to find a way that you're telling it, you're engaging an audience, but you're not showing, the flashes of things and got to keep it going and et cetera, which is an obligation of other forms of filmmaking. So you're trying to find that credibility to all of the characters and the locations and the cinematography. So it's not that you're not paying attention to it. You're just involved in these characters and the consequence. And so there's that thin line, because you don't want it to suddenly become, oh, it's too boring and it's too whatever. You know, how do you keep that audience engaged without, you've seen certain things that can be, far more, vividly wild, and you can't do that here, because then you kill the credibility, and the credibility goes out the window. And we've got to have an investment in the credibility on all sides of these characters that we're seeing portrayed in this miniseries.
Absolutely. And thankfully, that's exactly how it turned out. Gary, thank you for your time. We're going to bring you back shortly for our group chat.
Okay, thanks, sir.
I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Emmy winner Lucia Aniello, who is nominated for a DGA award for her pilot episode of Hacks called There Is No Line. Lucia, I fell in love with Hacks almost instantly, because not only because of the performances of the cast, particularly Emmy magnet Jean Smart, but because of the relationship between Deborah and Ava. I just found that so fascinating. They're not really fond of each other, but their walls are up, but you get glimpses that maybe we're headed somewhere. I'm wondering, when directing a pilot like this one, how mindful are you of telegraphing where their relationship might be headed, so we feel like we're embarking on some kind of journey with these people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that we were really trying to aim for in the pilot especially is really establishing who they were before they met, just because we wanted it to be actually the most exciting moment is like, oh, they finally meet, and we already know their points of view so strongly that by the time they actually get in a room together, you kind of already can imagine that they would have sparks in whatever way that whatever that means to you. So for us, just the idea that they both kind of were struggling in their own ways, but were also both quite headstrong and both quite, sharp and vicious in their own ways. The idea that they would be then having a tete-a-tete and sitting across from each other in that scene towards the end of the pilot. It was for us like, wanting to kind of establish that in terms of like, okay, now can you even imagine what's going to happen? But also not wanting to telegraph too much where we're going with the story, which, we're still, I think, literally in the middle of telling right now, still what does this relationship mean to the other person, and what does that mean, how does it affect them? So, we're still, I think, in the midst of telling that longer story. And so hopefully it wasn't telegraphed too much. I mean, like you said, they don't necessarily like love each other upon first meeting, but you can tell that there's something that they each appreciate about the other person, and can see, especially Deborah can, I think, see a bit of herself in Ava, somebody who's kind of unfairly cast aside, and but she also, on the other hand, wants to prove to Ava that she isn't a hack and that she really deserves this girl's respect. And so I think it's kind of a two-parter reason for why she does decide to hire Ava despite the disastrous interview.
Yeah, what I found most compelling was that there was something there, that vulnerability that was underlying for both of them. It felt like they kind of almost needed each other, but just hadn't really realized that yet. And I just wonder, is it difficult or challenging to have actors portray vulnerability authentically? Because sometimes it comes off pat, or it comes off maybe insincere. I'm just wondering if that was something that was front of mind when you were first putting this pilot together.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can tell, like, especially with Deborah's anger, when she finds out that her dates are under threat, when somebody comes off with anger, I think that actually is the biggest sign of insecurity, versus like a moment where they're kind of sad and maybe giving a sadder face. So I think there's different ways, at least, that I attempted to show the insecurity and vulnerability of both characters. I think for Ava, the fact that she like pulls her car over in the middle of the street to kind of try to berate somebody into essentially hiring her also is a kind of like desperation that I think says a lot. So thinking it's maybe important to show different ways that you can show that somebody's vulnerable and insecure and in a spot where they need help or they need another person, which is ultimately, of course, the show is a love story between the two of them. And so for them to be able to kind of fill that role or have a loving relationship and, for each other is in and of itself the true thing that they need, even though they think they need a job or they think they need more their dates back or whatever. But what they really need is somebody, a kindredness with another person who challenges them and ultimately makes them a better person, but, also makes the work better. So, yeah, there's a lot at play. Wow.
There is a lot at play. And then, of course, that being said, the show is really funny. Like, it's really funny. And yet it spotlights these two women in the twilight, or one of them in the twilight of her career, obviously, which can be quite bittersweet, even melancholy. So then what's the key to unlock the right tone? Because if it's too funny and too madcap, it diminishes the emotion. But then if it's too serious, it wastes their talents as comedic artists. So how did you toggle that properly so that it was just right?
I mean, that's something even now we still every day are trying to like just bring in the margins of the drama and the comedy. Like sometimes that we leave a lot on the edit room floor of stuff that's really, really funny, but is it just a little too broad and sketchy? And is this dramatic or is this melodramatic? And bringing in the edges so that it does feel like it's part of a whole it like isn't something that necessarily like it's in the tiniest little choices and of course in some bigger choices, but it is something that is constantly being tweaked that we don't actually even always know when we're writing, or even when we're directing. It's sometimes in the edit, or also sometimes we'll edit a scene. This is how we feel about it, but then in the context of the larger episode, or sometimes even the larger season, we'll then be like, oh, now that we've kind of gone a little more dramatic in this one, maybe the next one doesn't need to be quite so much, or does this need actually one more joke? Should we go back and re-edit that? So it's a constantly shifting tone that we're always trying to figure out what is the right tone. And I think also it's kind of interesting and exciting when you slightly deviate from that tone. And I think that that's also something that we want to continue to do with our storytelling on the show is not just replicate exactly what you experienced in season one. We want to give you the heart of it and the same, of course, tone, but we also want to stretch our muscles just a little bit and give you something maybe you didn't see coming. But that's the exciting part is figuring it out together. And that's something that Paul and Jen and I, truly do all day long.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you got the tone right because people have really responded to the show in such a positive way. When you won the Emmy a few months ago, or September last year, you were visibly shocked. You thanked Jean and Hannah, the cast and crew, for making something that we all needed to escape at that time, which is so true. And I love the way you genuinely were so awestruck. Just looking back, what's the first thing that comes to mind from that moment up on stage when you won the Emmy?
Blacking out, essentially. I mean, yeah, I think it was quite obvious. I really genuinely I did not think that was going to happen. And when Paul and Jen and I won for writing, we had a very, very small bit kind of thought of that day of this unrolling this thing, but we hadn't actually rehearsed anything or done anything beyond that. So we had a vague idea, like, okay, if something happens, this is generally what it is. We were very, very shocked. But then as soon as I got off stage, then all of a sudden, well, if it happened once, it could happen a second time. Like I could win for directing. So I turned to my husband, Paul, and I said, well, what if I win? Which is honestly the first time the thought even crossed my mind, was moments after winning writing. And he said, improvise. And so I did. I improvised. Luckily, I had done improv comedy for the better part of my 20s. So I genuinely was very much in the moment. And it was just genuinely I was so touched, and it was exciting because, it does mean to an extent that people have connected with the show. And especially when the show came out, because we wrote it and made it and it came out all, in the heart of the pandemic. And there's a little bit of a disconnect, I think, when you aren't really out in the world, and like, you hear from people, of course, that they're like, oh, I really like the show. And you're like, well, that's so sweet and lovely. But to kind of have some kind of perspective that like it's enough people really related to it that they would want to honor the show is really, it was very overwhelming. It also felt a little Truman Show-y, where I was like, me? It couldn't be. It is. So there's a lot going on. And I was also jet lagged because I had just come back from my wedding a couple of days earlier. That was in Italy. So I was just out of it. I don't know. I have no idea.
It was cool. And you ended with saying, I love everyone. And on that note, we love Hacks. And thank you for your time. We'll bring you back shortly for the group chat.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Robert.
I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Emmy nominee Craig Zobel, who is nominated for a DGA award, along with his team, for directing the limited series Mare of Easttown. Craig, first of all, it's really fascinating that you decided to direct all 7 episodes. That sounds like a really huge kind of undertaking to do. What are the benefits of doing a series like Mare of Easttown, where you're doing the whole thing?
I guess that the first and kind of like most noticeable to me benefit of like doing the whole thing is especially with something that has this kind of murder mystery plot, was to be able to make sure that we were honoring that plot like over the course of the other things that you're trying to do in an episode. Like if you just kind of come into like 1 or 2 episodes of a show in the middle of the thing, you might not know how a different character kind of played a different beat, where we were able to say like, okay, I'm pretty sure that that's going to read, this or that scene in episode 2 is going to probably read this way from what we actually, compared to what was on the script, like what we actually shot. It felt a lot more like the performance, sent you in this or that direction, so that you could, just monitor and kind of like make sure that you were telling the story, the whole, from a kind of a global perspective while you were working in a day-to-day scenario.
Yeah, I can understand that. I can imagine you'd probably get a lot of questions about, the confronting subject matter of the show, and particularly maybe working with Kate Winslet. I wanted to take a little bit more of a deeper dive, if possible, because months after seeing it, I still think about it from time to time, because it really did impact me personally. I just, for example, episode 6, Storm Must Be the Storm, when Mary's opening up about her trauma and grief in therapy, because she clearly hasn't properly, addressed her son Kevin's suicide. She recounts a horrible day, and then of course we see that flashback where she's bounding into the house and up into the attic. I've never really seen a scene like that before. It affected me. I'm sure you hear that often from people, and it blew my mind. I'm just wondering what was the most challenging part of putting that scene together, because it was very impactful, and I can imagine it would have been difficult to do on the day. Yeah,
no, that's an interesting kind of scene to think about and talk about, actually, because when in the screenplay there was a reference to like seeing a flashback, but when we shot Kate in the therapy session, she's quite compelling. Like it was pretty interesting to just watch the person tell you the story. Like I started to kind of like think to myself, like, I wonder if like in the edit room we're not going to even go to a flashback, because like, look at what we have an incredible actor, like being riveting, telling you something that happened in their past. So then that actually kind of colored like the making of the rest of the flashback, if that makes any sense. And we shot the flashback in different pieces, actually, due to like location stuff, like the outside of the house and the inside of the house and whatnot. So what it kind of did was it sort of made everyone, in looking at those flashback scenes, say like, okay, well, what do we do to beat Kate just telling the story? Like, what's going to be even better than that? Like what is an image that is going to like be impactful and kind of resonant in that? And that was, like it certainly, I can say like it wasn't a very long day. Her going up in the attic and seeing all that stuff. You know, I think that there's maybe 2 takes or 3 takes of that. There's not a whole lot of, you know, she couldn't do that a whole lot of times. For one, just because it's so emotional. And it was in some ways, it was sort of, it was interesting because, like I said, it was like we felt safe in the scene in a way, so we were able to see, like, get to play around with what the image of that day would have been in a way that I don't know that we would have, had we shot it in a different order, I don't know that we would have felt that way. I felt like that really did help because I already knew, just sitting in watching her do that in the therapy office was like emotional for everybody on set. So like I knew that it kind of like we had the scene in a way. So we were able to kind of layer on top of that. Yeah.
That's so fascinating because I'm so glad you said that. I found the therapy session probably even more emotional than seeing it because of the way that she would pause and stutter and stare off into the distance. It's really magical, and and I credit obviously to Kate winning an Emmy, but also credit to you. The other scene I wanted to mention, sequence is Detective Colin Zobel, your namesake.
Right, and randomly that was just like very random.
I know, right?
I have to say it was not like changed or something. I mean, I actually wanted to kind of change it, and now it's just this funny weird.
I love it. I love that connection. But he's played so beautifully by an Emmy-winning now Evan Peters, and he's so vulnerable, and he opens up, and he has a crush, to propositions Mare, and then bam, he's shot and dead. Did not see it coming, and I remember on social media people were beside themselves. So what work goes, as the director, what work goes into making an audience fall in love with a guy and then gut punch them, pull the rug from under them, and then he's gone?
So interestingly enough, for one, this was we knew it was a limited series. So like, I guess I had always kind of approached that character as kind of understanding that they were going to die in episode 5 in order to kind of like help further Mare's story, like it becomes, her darkest moment or whatnot. So working backwards from that, it was like, that character kind of was there to be the Watson in a certain sense in the detective story, and be able to like say a lot of expositionary, things that we kind of needed to make sure that everybody was tracking. And I just remember going to Evan and being like, how do we? It also sort of like the on the page, like I think the first blush idea that you would maybe like go to with that character would be that he's like the hot shot from New York, who's like come in. And so, it was in early discussions with Evan, just talking about like, what's a way that we can subvert that and make you like love him so that it is kind of like a big gut punch. And funny enough, like in the screenplay, it had described, actually in the episode in which he dies, is a time where he's very nervous to go out with her and to go out with Mare, and so he like drinks a little too much at dinner, and I remember like having a conversation with Evan and being like, I think we maybe need to move this up and just have this happen, have you be too drunk in a scene that early in the story where like it's like kind of the idea that I pitched was like, when you meet a coworker and you see them out in public and they're clearly like way drunker than they probably intended to be, and you're like, whoa, that guy's tying one on, and like the idea being that like he starts off as this kind of hotshot detective guy, but pretty quickly you can see that there's like a vulnerability, and that's like all like posturing. that hopefully that would like lead you to kind of love him more and sort of empathize with him. That was sort of the pitch, basically.
Well, it really worked because I remember finishing that episode and it was just completely blown away. Craig, thank you for your time. We're going to bring you back for a chat shortly.
Excellent.
I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Grammy-winning director Hiro Murai, who is nominated for a DGA award along with his team for directing limited series Station 11 and the first episode. Hiro, at first blush, Station 11 might make for uncomfortable viewing. It's set during a flu pandemic, it wipes out almost all of civilization, and we can't help but relate our story, our shared lived-in experience over the last 2 years to this. So were you conscious of that and of the inevitable parallels between our experience and the world of Station 11?
I mean, definitely. I think the interesting thing about the story of our show is that when we shot the pilot, this was pre-pandemic. So our pilot was filmed in end of 2019. And so a lot of the things we were playing with, it was all just speculative. We're trying to imagine a world where this would happen. And then somewhere in our edit process, the real pandemic hit and we were shut down for production. So 2 out of 10 episodes were shot before this actually happened to us. And so in a lot of ways, the bulk of the show is us sort of, negotiating with the fact that this hypothetical situation became a reality for us, and us kind of, working out our own feelings about being in the real life pandemic. But it was definitely a surreal experience, and a lot of our own experience with the real pandemic went into the making of the show. But yeah, I mean, when we first started, it was not obviously not a thought that we had in mind.
Wow, I mean, it's so eerily prescient. I mean, it's insane. For example, the first episode at times is quite confronting. We witness a plane fall from the sky and explode, crash in a fiery explosion. But it also features these beautiful moments of calm as we see glimpses of a post-apocalyptic world in which flora and fauna have enveloped the spaces previously occupied by humanity. And that's what I found actually most compelling for some reason. I found it really calming. What was the key to giving the audience that sense of what the world might look like post-pandemic, in a distant future?
Yeah, I mean, it's when Patrick Somerville, the showrunner, and I started talking, one of the first things I told him is that I didn't love the post-apocalypse genre in general, and a lot of that had to do with I love Cormac McCarthy as much as the next guy, but there's a certain sort of it tends to be about desperation, and it's about emotional stoicism and survival. It's usually very aesthetically bleak, and it's a very tough world to kind of live in for a long time. And so the idea of doing something that kind of subverted that expectation was really exciting to me. And what Pat was really trying to get at with the show was, how do you make a post-apocalypse survival show that's not about desperation and survival? It's about, a rebirth, a new chapter in humanity. And so it was kind of baked into our premise very early on. And so I started approaching the first episode. A lot of the first episode takes place in a very sort of claustrophobic, big Chicago skyline, and it's these 2 small characters trying to navigate, going from one side of the town to the next. And we try to imagine if you were, as as an anxious person, what would it feel like to be released from a crowded city? You feel very cathartic and freeing in some way, even though the circumstances are pretty dire. And so we kind of built the first episode around the contrast of these kind of big, towering, ominous, monolithic skyline versus the year 20 flashes, where even though it's sort of eerily quiet, it's also very pastoral and quiet and serene in some ways.
Yeah, I love how the show jumps around a bit and takes us back and forth, pre and post, the before and obviously the present, which is in 20 years' time. But I think that relationship between Jeevan and the young Kirsten is so pivotal to the entire narrative. It's our way in emotionally, I think. It's really compelling, beautifully rendered paternal bond that they share. And I found it really authentic and genuine, and maybe it wouldn't have been so if it wasn't done properly. I was just wondering how challenging it was to achieve that connection between those two actors and to make that bond so pivotal to the entire story.
I mean, a lot of that, the credit for that has to go to Himesh and Matilda, who played Jeevan, and young Kirsten. It's so much about it is the dynamic and chemistry they naturally have. But even conceptually, I think Pat and I early on talked about how we wanted this show to be this big genre piece, but have it, the scope of it be super intimate. Even though it's about kind of a world building, in some ways, science fiction story. I think everything that was important to us in the story were just small character chemistry and interactions, and all of episode 1 hinges on how Jeevan and Kirsten bounce off of each other. And Himesh, just when I first met him, he just had this very soulful, aura to him, but he was also so funny and quick and evasive, and all these qualities that I personally related to, but also it just kind of reminded me of just a lot of my friends, honestly, kind of stunted in adolescence, good-hearted people who are trying to do the right thing at the right time, but trying to find the courage to do so. And then Matilda is just, she's just incredible to me. She when I met her, I think she was, I want to say 9 or 10, and she was just so much more mature than me, honestly. She just has this presence and assuredness, and she just had this confidence that just bounced right, so well off of Himesh, And so when we got them together in a chemistry read, it just, I immediately said I could watch this for 10 episodes,
Easily. To be honest, when something hits home for you personally, when you miss them, I miss them. I actually miss seeing Dr. Chaudhry on my screen. My final question is this. The play opens on this eerily austere staging of this Shakespearean play. And I'd love to know what you think about this. The show demonstrates that in the face of the most horrifying world-ending catastrophe, art lives on. And perhaps more specifically in this instance, Shakespeare and theatre outlives everything and ultimately sustains us as human beings. What are your thoughts on that through line that we see in the first episode and of course towards the end as well?
Do you mean Shakespeare specifically, or just the notion of art surviving?
Probably both, but more the latter.
I think, I think anyone who makes things for a living or considers themselves an artist for a living, maybe to a pretentious point, like to believe that the art is the most important thing, and that's, it has a very important role in us being human, and I think that was always a big ask for a TV show to be preaching that so loudly. But that's something that I always loved about the premise of it. It's not even the fact that the pieces of art themselves are important, but it's necessary for people to be able to express them. And if someone expresses those feelings genuinely, it will connect with somebody else. So it's kind of used as a means of connection between disparate people. So I think it's less about whether it needs to be high art or low art, or it can be a Shakespeare, it can be Star Trek, it can be a comic book, but it's all just a tool to connect all these people. And I think that's an idea that I think we were in love with from the very beginning.
Well, thank you, Hiro, for a beautiful series, especially pilot, and congrats on your DGA nomination, and we'll bring you back shortly.
Thank you so much.
I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Oscar winner Barry Jenkins, who is nominated for a DGA award, along with his team for directing limited series The Underground Railroad. Barry, you directed all 10 episodes. That is a huge undertaking for a series like this that is so visually, orally stunning and immersive to experience. What are the benefits of taking the reins for the entire project like you did?
Thank you for having me, first of all. The benefits were our show was a road movie. And so Tuso Mbedu, who plays our main character, Cora, she kind of goes through the whole journey, but every time she reaches a new state, there's a whole new environment, a whole new world, a whole new cast of characters, and yet it's meant to feel like the same journey. And so I think having one director or singular vision helps sort of unite the aesthetic, but also unite the feeling of the show throughout that journey. I think the other part of it was, if something happened in the filming of episode 2 or episode 3, and there was a spark or there was some kind of like off ramp that we thought was worth taking, being the sole director of the show, you sort of knew where the stitching had to be to get us back onto the main thread of the show. So I think both from a craft standpoint, but also from a story standpoint, an emotional standpoint, it was awesome.
Yeah, one of the qualities I most admired about this series and your work generally is the artistry. For example, it opens with Cora falling in slow motion, lensed beautifully by DP James Laxton, and this gorgeous composition by Nicholas Britell. It's one of the many examples where your more impressionistic style of filmmaking really shines through. It subverts our expectations by giving us imagery that is like breathtaking, beautiful, but obviously quite horrifying at the same time. Why do you like telling stories in this often like hallucinatory and poetic way?
I think part of it is intentional. I think that particularly with these characters, making a show about my ancestors, about these the enslaved, typically they're frozen in time. They're kind of frozen in time, and also they predate most of the technology that we have for capturing people's images. And so in recreating these images and reanimating their stories, it kind of felt like we wanted to allow the audience to get past this almost frozen in time, very surface depiction that we have of them. These people who this thing happened to in the past that are frozen only in this moment, and allow the audience to go inside their consciousness. And I don't know, when I think of images, and this kind of goes back to the things I've been working on the last 5 years, they've all been adaptations. And so as I'm reading the work of Colson Whitehead or reading the work of James Baldwin, I'm seeing things, and those things aren't tethered to a narrative. They aren't linear. And I think James and Nick and Alex Bickle, our colorist, they just do a really great job of going on that journey with me. And yeah, the opening of the show was something that I really thought long and hard about, but not trying to unlock it mathematically, just trying to see which images were most potent that would grab me, that we could recreate. And yeah, that was a really fun one to shoot.
Yeah, it's really unforgettable. It stuck with me all this time. And then we go straight to the last episode, and it ends with Cora and Molly emerging from the Underground Railroad and heading west to an unknown future. In your heart of hearts, where do you think they end up? What do you want audiences to think or believe about Cora's destiny?
I think that progress is a direction, not a destination. And I think it's why she couldn't arrive at a fixed place. I think the story of Black people in this country, since our first origins here, the first time we set foot on these shores, has always been about this continual sort of journey towards progress, it used to be towards equality, towards personhood, towards so many things. And so it felt like the ending of the show had to be a direction, not a destination. It's interesting, we were scouting for that location because we ended up filming the entire show in the state of Georgia, and we got there. And it was really wonderful to see how 10 people could stand in one place and take a completely different feeling from it. I described it, I was like, oh, this is like Tarkovsky, this is death. They've come out of the zone like Stalker, and they've arrived at this place of death. But she makes this offering by planting her birthright, by planting these seeds, and the next person to come behind her will have sustenance. And so that was how we arrived at the image and how we arrived at the ending. And I think if I want audience to take anything away from the show, it's that the journey continues and that progress is a direction, not a destination.
Yeah, absolutely, which is so true to this very day. You know, you touched on this earlier, but the show allowed the audience to feel, to empathize in some very unusual ways. Like, you know, at the end, the last episode entitled Mabel, that discloses what happened to Cora's mother, who didn't intentionally abandon her as a baby. That's so heartbreaking. Just thinking about it now, like, that was devastating to watch. And I felt really sad for them, but I felt really helpless and powerless generally. It was a feeling that I'm not used to feeling. And I'm wondering if that was the intention, to evoke and elicit this empathy towards these enslaved people that we don't get to empathize with often, as you say, because we see them in textbooks. We don't see them as people because we don't share their experience.
Yeah, I think the empathy, my hope would be that it's instinctual, it's innate, it's something just as human being to human being, but it's something that arises organically. It's why I wanted to tell this show as a limited series, not as a feature. When I first spoke to Coulson, I wanted the audience to experience the entire spectrum of emotions that a character like Cora might experience. You know, I love that she's just a woman, you know, she's not famous, you know, she wasn't some notable abolitionist, and those people are great and we should tell their stories. But I love that we could turn the camera on any face in the frame and they would have a story worth spending 10 hours with. And over the course of those 10 hours and experiencing life through their eyes, walking them out in their shoes, that yes, it would activate the empathy and the audience member. And if that meant at times they had to feel the sense of hopelessness, of claustrophobia, they would feel that. But also this woman gets to make love, and that they would also feel to go from someone who has no control over their person to someone who has absolute control, that she can reject love and choose when to accept it, just how wonderful that might be. And then hopefully coming out of the show to realize this is worth fighting for. Everyone should get to experience this no matter where they start.
Yeah, absolutely. And my final question is, obviously the series subject matter, it's an important one. I'd love to know more briefly what you think about this emerging narrative in social and political discourse nationwide about how, you know, what we teach kids at school, particularly about topics from history that might be uncomfortable, like slavery and racism, and its legacy and lasting systemic impact. Are you hoping that people will see this series for what it is? It's a way for us to go back and look and appreciate what these people went through.
I do. I think as someone who works, you know, in this art form, it's interesting. The two original images of cinema are a train coming towards the camera and D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. And I think taking this book written by a Black man, fictional, but based on the truthful experience of my ancestors, about a train running underground, built and piloted by Black folks, carrying them to freedom. I think in a certain way, I hope that that says to anyone participating in this discourse that these stories have to be told continually. Why? Because for the past 4 years, 4.5 years, 5 years, I've heard the slogan, "Make America Great Again." Make America great again, as though America has always been great in the continuum of experience of this country. And yet I can point to my ancestors and know for a fact, America was not great for them. And they lived in the time of these very great documents, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and yet still America was not great for them. I think if we're always reminded of that, or always aware of that, at the very least, when we hear something like that, we can contextualize it and unpack it in a way that it doesn't have the power to do some of the things that it has done.
Totally agree, man. Thank you so much for your time. We're going to bring you back now for our group chat. Welcome to our Meet the Experts TV Director DGA nominees panel. I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, and I'm here with a star-studded lineup of amazing helmers and artists, and they include Danny Strong, nominated for Dopesick, Barry Levinson, also nominated for Dopesick, Lucia Aniello, nominated for Hacks, Craig Zobel, nominated for Mare of Easttown, Hiro Murai, nominated for Station 11, and Barry Jenkins, nominated for The Underground Railroad. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Such amazing work that you've all been nominated for this year. I really want to know, as a director, when you're in the thick of production, how do you know, or when do you know, that you have the perfect take? And I want to go to you first, Craig. I'm very interested to know, because I'm sure you probably have this internal battle quite often on Mare of Easttown.
Yeah, I mean, I'm scared to answer that because I feel like I'm constantly feeling like I need another. But I suppose when performance-wise, I think when all of a sudden I have 5 other ideas because I've seen something new in the performance that I've read 100 times at that point and kind of know the what it's supposed to be, and all of a sudden I see the actor has found some new bit. I usually end up wanting to go another time, but I feel like that is when I've probably gotten a take that matters and is interesting, because it's sort of shaken me out of my day and out of the thing that I was kind of prepping to do. I guess that's how I'd answer that.
Okay. Lucia, what about you? You're working on Hacks. I think you're in production now. But how do you know? How do you know?
Yeah, I think I don't always know. No idea. But I suppose, there is, I think, very similar to what Craig said, if there's, if it's a comedic moment and it elicits a laugh out of me, and that's, obviously I work in comedy, but, to get a actual out loud laugh out of me is, that means that I really genuinely think it's funny, especially because I've, written it 9 months earlier or something. So to be like, wow, that was good because they made it better is definitely a moment that it allows me to be like, okay, we should move on. But if it's not a comedic moment and it's more either, a dramatic moment or even just a shot that's supposed to, have some kind of aesthetic value beyond the comedy or even just the story, I think there's this weird thing sometimes that happens that I literally almost am I can see that moment on TV or something. There's something about it that I'm that's exactly how I imagined it. That there's something about it that feels it's it's this ephemeral kind of I don't know, above me thing where I'm just that's yes, and it's it's a printed moment. And sometimes I definitely don't always get that, and sometimes I do, and sometimes things are not as I imagined, and it's disappointing, and sometimes they're better than I imagined, and it's so exciting. And so I personally walk away from every day with a mixed bag of feelings about that day, and then I have to go to sleep and do it again. So I try not to think about it too much.
That's right. Hiro, what about you? You particularly in your episode of Station 11, you had to work with a younger actor, but how do you know you have the best take and you need to move on?
I'm so glad you guys answered first, because I really don't know a lot of times. I think I have a pretty good barometer for what feels honest and not honest. And I think, when something feels dishonest, I just keep picking at the thing that bothers me working with actors till it feels honest. And so it's a very weird, very it sounds like it's a binary, but it's kind of a green or red switch. And if it's red, I just keep kind of turning the, plate around until it feels right to me. And hope that at the end of the day, we have, all the things we need to make a good story.
Do you feel the same way, Barry? Especially when you're working on a show that is, confronting or difficult, challenging? How do you feel that you've got the best take?
Yeah, I do feel the same way. And I think I love that so far no one said, oh, it was exactly what I thought, because it's never exactly what you thought. You're always just working towards something that feels right and not something that feels like what you assumed it would be. When I went to film school, we shot everything on film, and we didn't have a lot of film. It was 1,200 feet to make a 10-minute short. And so you get really ruthless, and you go, if I call it a lightning strike take, if lightning struck the set and we had to shut down, would we have a scene? Could we play the whole scene in just that take? And once I get that, then I go, okay, cool. Now we can start. The pressure's off a little bit. We can build around that. But I love what Craig said, because my circle takes, I'll get in the edit and Joy will be like, okay, this is the one you circled. And I'll be like, that's the one? It's not what's in that take. It's that so many ideas came out of that take. And then we'll go 4 takes later. It's oh shit, that's the one. So I think it's a combination of what everyone's saying. And it's kind of cool, because what makes this thing fun is it's never the same thing. It's a scene to scene, shot to shot. It's always something different that you go, oh shit, that's the one. And you get in post and it's clearly not.
Wow. Okay. Danny, you've obviously been in front of the camera for many, many years. So now as the guy in the director's chair, how do you know?
Well, I'm not really looking for the best take. I'm just looking for a take that I think works, or that feels right or honest or sort of, I'm just trying to make the scene work at the end of the day. And then once I have something that feels like it works, I'm like, okay, so we got that. And then if there's time, we can play a little bit. As you said, I'm an actor, so I like to see if the actors are comfortable, if they want to do another one, if they want to try something different. I like to keep things very loose. But at the end of the day, I'm just looking for that one take that I'm like, okay, yeah, I got it. The scene works, or this part of the coverage works, and we can move on. It is funny. What Barry Jenkins was saying, you circle a take and then you get into post and you're like, oh, that wasn't it at all. I way prefer that one. Or you'll be shooting a scene and you'll be watching it on set and you'll be like, this scene's incredible. You'll have tears in your eyes. You're so moved by it. And then you watch it within the cut and you're just like, you're like, this is what I thought I had. And then sometimes scenes that are, you don't think, you shoot them, you get them done, you think it's right. And then in the course of the story in the cut, it's quite powerful or quite moving or just something that really surprises you. And that's always a great gift and very exciting.
My final question to the panel is more about what's inspired you over the years, both personally and professionally. What's your favorite film or TV show that you watch over and over, that you hold dear to your heart? It's an open question to whoever really wants to pipe in. I mean, I could be here all day talking about what I adore, but what about you guys? Who would like to go first?
I mean, I think right now, kind of what I've been watching a bunch of. I just finished Station 11. I'm a huge fan. It's really, really good. I've been. It's funny. I've been seeking out like kind of entertainments more. The last 2 weeks I've watched Mad Max Fury Road twice because I guess like getting away from like the kind of like the heady drama of something like Mare of Easttown. It's been fun to just watch, like, George Miller is incredible where he puts the camera as like quite genius and unlike anything I've ever seen. So it's like just things that I haven't really seen. That's sort of what I'm watching right now, like that and Spielberg things.
Yeah, by the way, one of the greatest Australian films of all time. So thank you for mentioning it. Who else? Go for it, Lucia.
Well, I mean, in an effort not to just list out things that'll make me sound smart and cool, to be completely honest, right now, I am rewatching for potentially the 5th or 6th time. I'm watching Arrested Development again, and that's what I'm doing right now. And I love it, and it's so funny. And at the end of the day, when I just want to watch something that makes me laugh, and that, I just think it's the best. And so I'm rewatching it right now, and I go home, and it is my warm tub television show, and I love it, and I'll never not love it.
Oh, I love it too. What about you, Danny?
I've got sort of like a rotating list of top 5 that it constantly shifts in and out, but there's consistently a number 1, which is Apocalypse Now. And I literally just took my nephew to see Apocalypse Now at the New Beverly, and he's 17, senior in high school. It was thrilling to see how much it impacted him. When it was over, he just turned to me and he said, I felt like I was going crazy with them up the river, and I just thought, wow, if Francis Ford Coppola had heard that, I think he would have been so thrilled, because that's literally like the essence and the core of what that movie is, what the book is, Heart of Darkness, right? So I'm a huge fan of Apocalypse Now, a huge fan of just Coppola's movies in general. There's a certain theatricality and a certain, but deep dramatic, weight to them at the same time. And then there's also an entertainment value where they're entertaining in a very dramatic, sort of tension-filled way. But I love that they're shot with this sort of grand, epic scope to them. And then I'm also watch over and over The Sweet Smell of Success is just one of my favorites. It's it's like this combination of 2 of the greatest writers of the 20th century, greatest composer, 2 of the greatest actors, and the poor director never gets like the shout out for it. They're like literally everyone else around him. Oh, cinematographer, James Wong Howe shot it, right? So it's this incredible group of artists that came together to make this film that's a real masterpiece of its time. So those are sort of my Apocalypse Now and Sweet Smell of Success. I rewatch a lot.
Nice. Barry?
I guess like everybody else, I'm just watching random things, but Lulu and I have been watching Survivor. We watched the new season of Survivor, which we were at lunch, or we were in somebody's yard. Well, actually, Lulu's agent is Mike White's agent, and so we randomly met him early in the pandemic, and he told us he had been a contestant on Survivor, and so we watched a season. And we just went down the Survivor rabbit hole over the pandemic. And so we just finished the new season of Survivor, which is interesting because I remember when reality TV first started, or my first brush with it, which was The Real World, New York and San Francisco. And people were so natural back then. And then we went through this phase where they weren't natural. And Survivor is this weird petri dish where Survivor has its own sort of performance style and way of being organic on camera. And I don't know, I just find it fascinating. So we just finished the newest season, which was really kind of interesting down the stretch, I must say. I recommend people watch it if you're a Survivor fan.
It's such a good show. It's so well made. After all these seasons, it's still hitting the ball out of the park. Hiro, what about you?
I just went to the Academy Museum inside the Hayao Miyazaki exhibit. And so I've been kind of revisiting his films. My childhood favorite movie was My Neighbor Totoro. So I rewatched that recently and was like, hey, I had pretty good taste as a kid. So it's a really well-made film, and it's so thoughtful and human, and the pacing, and there's something about it that just it just kind of resonates with me in a very basic level. So I've just been kind of going through all of his films lately.
That's so cool. That you either watch things for comfort and fun, like we watch Marvel movies because I have 2 little kids, and that's my hot tub movie kind of go to. Or you watch things from your childhood, or you watch things that you really admire. Like I could certainly just watch Big Business with Lily Tomlin and Bette Midler pretty much every day and still be quite happy. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time, and congrats on your DGA TV nominations. I wish you could all win, but unfortunately that's not how it works. But anyway, congratulations, good luck, and we hope to see you soon.